Statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should have brought my book in the company of men and women at the Citadel this morning.
I brag about your book all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to have the opportunity today to highlight the importance of freedom of speech in our country, as well as the important work to ensure that K-12 curriculums in public schools serve our students well. The First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees the right of freedom of speech to all Americans, and the First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. The government may only set reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions in very limited circumstances. The government cannot and should not police the speech of its citizens, even when that speech is disagreeable or repugnant. When they say it aloud, sometimes we want to know what they have to say. We don't punish thought criminals in this country unless, of course, you're maybe a main character in Orwell's 1984. Freedom of speech isn't just a legal mandate enshrined in our Constitution, it's an essential element to democracy. This fundamental freedom ensures all views across the spectrum are debated within the marketplace of ideas, and public institutions of higher education are bound to abide by the First Amendment's prohibition on restrictions on freedom of speech, yet often in this country we see attacks on that very freedom. Public universities and colleges frequently run afoul of the First Amendment freedom by enforcing broad or overly broad speech codes, or by chilling speech across college campuses, using biased response teams to investigate thought criminals. There have also been disturbing campaigns on these campuses to expel students, fire faculty, or disinvite speakers who hold views that are considered to go against the progressive consensus or groupthink. These universities and colleges are unlawfully stifling speech to coddle young adults at a time when their educational careers where they should be exposed to a variety of ideas and perspectives. While progressive activists shut down speech on college campuses, they're trying to hyper-expose young children who are still learning to read, write, add, and subtract. And I can personally remember a story when my kids were in elementary school, and I was driving them home, picked them up from the carpool line in school that day, and they had a government lesson on government democracy versus socialism versus communism, and I asked them, which one's best? And they said socialism. So I pulled over on the closest exit off the interstate and had a conversation about the differences, and then they walked out of that conversation. She says, no, Mommy, democracy is the best form of government for the United States of America. In an effort to indoctrinate our young students, progressives are burdening curricula with divisive and radical ideologies such as race essentialism, racial scapegoating, and content of a sexual nature that's not appropriate, oftentimes for very young children. All children should be taught the academic skills they need to succeed, along with the history of our country, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We must also teach our children about the problematic chapters in our history, and we must also teach them about the heroes who lead us and have led us to a more perfect union. In fact, one of those heroes today is joining our hearing today, Ruby Bridges, who you mentioned earlier, a civil rights icon and author who made history as a 6-year-old girl, courageously braving a hostile crowd to integrate an all-white elementary school in Louisiana. And in my home state of South Carolina, we have so many of those heroic stories that should be taught in our schools, from Harriet Tubman, who rescued 750 slaves in one night in Beaufort County, South Carolina, to Joseph P. Rainey, who was the first African-American to represent in the U.S. House of Representatives, who represented, by the way, South Carolina's 1st congressional district, the seat that I sit in today. Public schools should exercise discretion with parental input and oversight to decide what is included in their curricula and what books to include in their libraries, especially for young elementary school students. But no child attending our public schools should be subject to government indoctrination or exposed to radical ideologies while they're still building the foundations of their education. Instead, we ought to be teaching critical thinking skills so college-age students can discern, argue, and act on those values when faced with open and frank academic discourse. And of course, our high school students, even if they aren't going to college, should be prepared to enter the workforce when they graduate. I thank all the witnesses for appearing today and looking forward to a robust discussion on the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and how we can work together to preserve that freedom for every single American. Thank you, Chairman Raskin, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Mace, for a very thoughtful